Have you ever encountered a freeloader in your life? Chances are, if you've been around teenagers, yes, you have. But besides that, maybe somebody at work who has you taking all the action and then they do their best to take all the credit for it. Or it could be a relationship, maybe a friendship, to where they can never come up with any ideas of what to do. Instead, they sit back and wait for you to take the initiative to make things happen. And then when you do, maybe they're not always satisfied with what you chose. Yeah, there's all different types of freeloaders. At one point, I um I had a young woman in my house uh, that I was trying to assist because she had not had the easiest circumstances, and that it wasn't required of her to pay any rent. But there were duties around the house for her to take care of, as well as her schooling. But what was interesting, and she was a young adult, this was not a teenager. What was interesting is as time went on, things began to slip and slide into that painful pit. And I would have worked a 10 or 12-hour day, come home to find her sitting on the couch going, "What's for dinner?" And after having a few conversations and things not changing, well, that's when we draw boundaries. And a boundary to be effective always has to have consequences. It doesn't mean that you share with that person beforehand what the consequences are going to be, but there must be consequences. Because if there's not, then you have a hope, a wish, a dream, but nothing that can be actionable. So, anyway, we had to finally part ways. Why is that? Because her presence began to not inform me and no longer affect me, but began to infect me, that I no longer wanted to come home. My sanctuary, my sacred place, was now being invaded by someone who was wanting to make sure that I took care of their needs, but it was going to be at my expense. Well, here's what's interesting. We can have thoughts do the same thing. We can have painful experiences from our past do the same thing. And so, what happens whenever those intrusive thoughts that are trying to freeload and you've been ignoring them? We have 40 to 60,000 thoughts every single day. Take out 8 hours of sleep, that's basically a thought every single second. And science tells us that approximately 80% of them are the same thoughts that we had yesterday and last week and last month and last year and last decade. We have a lot of freeloading thoughts. But what happens whenever they begin to sabotage you, to cause you to question yourself, your inner sanctuary, that sacred space and place that you can go to reveal yourself at your healthiest, is now someplace you want to avoid. This is the reason why some people cannot sit quietly with themselves. There must be the TV or some sort of background noise going on, or they're scrolling constantly on their phone, because when they get quiet, those freeloaders show up, but in a way where it begins to freak stuff up. So what is it that we need to do? Well, in the Bible, it tells us that we are to take them captive. Not that we're supposed to bargain with them, not that we're supposed to chant affirmations to try to counteract them. We're supposed to take them captive so that they can work for us. Had a client where last week we were working on an exercise called the 9 vulnerabilities. And the 9 vulnerabilities are a way that you can connect with others in an authentic way once they've earned that right. But they always start out as a way where we are disempowered, where they're not healthy, they're not functional, they're not regulated. So that they start out on what's known as the never-ending need sign, and then we're supposed to move them into superior strength. Okay. So we were doing an exercise called the 9 vulnerabilities, and I knew something was going to come up because it typically does, to where we can start getting to causes instead of always treating symptoms. And so they told me that a few days after seeing me, that they started waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a memory of a family member telling them that they weren't any good, that they were never going to get it, that nobody would want them. By the way, if you want to look at abusive tactics, the very first thing that they do is they isolate you. Nobody's ever going to want you. And then they make it personal to where you're never going to be good enough. And then, if they're really good, they'll take it and they'll project it into the future that this is how crappy your future looks because of who you are. And all three of those were done. Well, here's what's great. Anything that has been learned can be relearned. So the vulnerability that came up, well, we have some relearning to do around it. But what do we do about the memory of the person accosting my client when they were a child and doing this to them? So this is where we utilize hypnosis, and we take the client into what's known as an objective experience. See, subjective is when you're in the experience as if you were going through it, who you were at the original time. Well, they weren't safe. So what did I need to do? I needed to put them into the experience as the adult that they are now and say, okay, you need to advocate for that child. Now, everybody's different. Some may just take the child and leave that situation. Others may draw a boundary. Others may actually tell the person that was doing the hurt and potential harm exactly how they feel about them. I leave it up to my client, but the client needs to go in and do some inner child work where they get the younger self out of this situation. And then, next step is to let that memory, that person know, if you're going to show up again, these are the new operating rules. You will work for me. This is how we take it captive. So we're either kicking you to the curb, but if you choose to come back, this is how it's going to happen from here on out. Will one time be enough? No, it will not. This is something that once the client has implemented the first action, they're going to need to repeat it till they get the results. But here's what I want you to know about stopping the self-sabotage when freeloading thoughts and memories begin to muck things up. No longer approach it from the helpless position you were in when it originally happened. Stand up with the power that you have now and let it know that either this is how it's going to toe the line or it's kicked to the curb. But you are no longer going to put up with it trying to hold you back. So, until we get together again, it's time for you to discover how much power you truly have. Because as you use it, then what's happening is that you begin to relearn and you are developing your character. You're upgrading that identity for impact. No longer will you allow people, places, and things from your past in your present or ever to arrive in your future to show up in a way that's going to infect you. From now on, you choose, and you choose impact.